The floor is free. I recognize the honourable for Toronto St. Paul's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in this place to speak out and defend interests of the people, not just of Toronto St. Paul's, but of all of Canada. Canadians who are not Liberal insiders and did not profit from the largesse of this government and its misallocation of capital through the Sustainable Development Technology Canada program. I'm standing here today to address an issue that has left Canadians poorer, an issue that has left Canadians shaking their heads and questioning the direction of the Liberal government that has failed our environment. The government has failed accountability and, most importantly, failed the people of Canada. And yet, this NDP-Liberal government sits upright in their respective seats as if there's nothing to see here. In fact, there's less than nothing to see here. There's a vacuous void of vanished taxpayer dollars, vanished into the pockets of friends and insiders. For years, this Prime Minister has positioned himself as the champion of the environment, saying that his government works hard to fight climate change. He continues to claim that he has lowered emissions while investing in Canada's economy. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? While this Liberal government tries to gaslight Canadians, yes, he'll gaslight us into thinking they are leading the way on climate action. They actually can't even hit their own emissions targets. The only thing they seem to be investing in is their own pockets, their own futures, at the expense of Canadians. I campaigned for this role, Mr. Speaker, because I'm worried about the finances of this country and what it means for our children's futures, and our children's futures, and the futures of their kids, and so on. This NDP government, led by this Prime Minister, have demonstrated a lack of financial...
I got a point of order. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
I know the member's brand spanking new, and we are looking forward to the NDP government, but that will be in 2025. It's not an NDP government. He needs to correct the record because he...
we're defending and debate. The honourable member for... I'm going to go to the honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, but just in his comments, the member from Timmins James Bay used a term, total falsehood, that I think may be unparliamentary. I'm not certain of that, but if it is, it would be a good idea for him to withdraw.
I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why I shouldn't have heard this at all. The honourable member for Victoria.
Just on the point of order that my honourable colleague from Timmins James Bay raised, when inaccurate information is repeatedly put on the record, which has been the case by the Conservatives time and time again, the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, Chapter 3, says it is impossible to codify all incidents which might be interpreted as matters of obstruction, interference, etc. But having found some matters found to be prima facie include the provision of misleading information, which I think this is an example of right here.
I will have a look at that and come back if I need to. The honourable member for Toronto St. Paul's.
This Liberal government, supported by the NDP, led by this Prime Minister, have demonstrated a lack of financial acumen, with the case in point being the mismanagement of the Green Slush Fund. The Green Slush Fund, its mismanagement, wasted tax dollars, and rewarding of friends and insiders represents the overall style and approach to governing by this Liberal government. I'm new here, Mr. Speaker, as you've just heard, and I may never have been in government. This was well pointed out by the Minister of Housing a few days ago as he answered a softball question posed by the member from Don Valley East in an unsuccessful attempt to throw me under the bus. The tenor of the question was about my commitment to the people of Toronto St. Paul's because I didn't advocate for a $471 million transfer to the city to increase housing. $471 million, Mr. Speaker. That's about $40,000 per home that the city said they can build. Remember that number. The fact is that after that $471 million, housing starts have declined in Toronto. Where is the accountability? That means wasted money, misallocated resources, resulting in a drag on GDP. The same result from the same government. And that's bad for the people of Toronto writ large and bad for the people of Toronto St. Paul's. But we have a solution. to the loose wallet Liberal largesse. Let's cut the GST homes under $1 million. Let's cut the GST on homes. The quick math is that on a home of, say, $800,000, a buyer would save $40,000 from the GST cut, the same amount the city got for the decline in starts. The same amount the city got for the decline in starts. Who wants the money? The people or the government? However, unlike the Minister of Finance and unlike the Housing Minister, who prefer to give money away to projects with dubious outcomes, I have a background in finance. So, I know that over the long term, the math says that the buyer of that $800,000 home will save somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 over the term of a 25-year mortgage. That's the power of common sense and a GST cut. Let's now return to the pressing issue of the slush fund. Sustainable Development Technology Canada was federally funded, a not-for-profit organization whose purpose was to invest and support the development of new green technologies for a better environment. Fulfilling this purpose and supporting sustainable innovation would have been a great opportunity for the Liberal government to actually follow through on their promises to fight climate change. But instead of a well-managed, respected organization to help Canadian companies develop sustainable green technologies, we have a Liberal green slush fund, a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle filled with corruption, devoid of accountability, and most troubling of all, with no regard for the people who funded it, hardworking Canadian taxpayers. We've heard countless promises from the Liberal government to take bold actions on climate change and green innovation, but as time passes, it becomes clear these promises are hollow. The reality is that it appears the Liberals are only interested in making themselves and their friends rich. When the Liberals overtook the SDTC, it was never about green energy. It was about the lining of the pockets of Liberal insiders. As the Auditor General found, Liberal appointees gave $400 million taxpayer dollars to their own companies, involving 186 conflicts of interest, and this was only a sample of the total mismanaged capital allocations. Meanwhile, food bank visits are at an all-time high in my community of constituents. They tell me they can't afford the cost of living. $400 million could have better benefited those people in St. Paul's and elsewhere who are suffering from out-of-touch Liberal policies. Now, the government is refusing to table the necessary documents in Parliament so that the RCMP can thoroughly investigate the corruption and scandal of the Prime Minister's slush fund. Parliament has been stalled for numerous weeks, now because they refuse to hand over the documents. Parliament ordered the documents. Why is there such a lack of transparency surrounding these projects from the Transparency Prime Minister? Why are we seeing such a rigorous lack of accountability for how taxpayer dollars are being spent? Well, as one SDTC whistleblower said in committee, and I quote, "I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation from being a public nightmare, and they would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like this SDTC in the public sphere." End quote. From a whistleblower. This is not a fabricated scandal. This whistle has been blown by courageous individuals who saw firsthand what was happening. The Liberals do not want the public to find out that instead of investing in our farmers, who know a thing or two about stewarding the land, or supporting innovation that can improve the lives of Canadians, they use this fund as a slush pool for insiders. They don't want Canadians to know that instead of investing taxpayer dollars into the most promising projects and companies, the Liberals' hand-picked and hand-appointed chair and her board funneled taxpayer dollars and to projects and companies that were run by their friends or where they had a financial interest. It seems to me that the green part of SDTC is less about the environment and more about the color of the cash lining the pockets of their friends. One of the reasons my constituents elected me, Mr. Speaker, according to what I heard and am hearing when speaking to them in the community and at their doorsteps, is that I have experience in business. So I think about that. And I wonder what if somebody did this in a properly run public company? And you know what would happen to that person once the paper trail is analyzed? That person would be fired. Fired. And it really makes you think, what fate would belie the Liberal government should they just hand over the documents and drive on? This is the kind of situation they teach you to avoid in any business school or ethics class. And perhaps our financial leaders on the other side of the House miss those classes. Still, Mr. Speaker, the misallocation of money leads to the destruction of capital in this country. This causes a loss of Canadian competitiveness, a reduction in productivity, and a decline in GDP. And these misallocations, they compound over time, just like the lost opportunity on the interest we all pay for our government debt, including on this $400 million. That's at least another $16 million per year, which could go a long way to solving issues in Toronto like gun crime, but instead, this is a drag on the economy. Just a couple of weeks ago, StatsCan came out with the news of just how horrible the Canadian economy is under this Prime Minister. How this government's mismanagement has compounded the misery of the Canadian economy. For the 8th time in the last 9 quarters, our per capita GDP has declined. That's also the 5th consecutive quarterly decline in per capita GDP. It's now fallen more than any other G7 country since 2019. In my analysis, that's a recession for most individuals. The average Canadian is worse off. And that's the direct result of higher taxes on capital gains, on energy, and on work, and just about everything else that you buy. This government is driving out investment by hiking taxes on everything. That is indisputable. Those community members I spoke about earlier, they tell me the same thing. The people I meet at St. Paul's on the doorsteps, they can see what is happening. In fact, they expressed their dissatisfaction this summer. After 3 decades, the people of Toronto St. Paul's have asked for change. Mr. Speaker, the Greeks had a myth, the myth of King Midas, where he was granted the power to turn anything into gold that he touched. Gold. What a gift that would be. But this ultimately became a liability for King Midas, as his greed led him to make foolish decisions on what he would turn into gold. His food, for example. It turned into gold, he couldn't eat, he was hungry. In another section of the Midas story, he becomes fearful of his power and embraces his beautiful daughter, who's immediately transformed into a golden statue. In his despair, he prays to Dionysus, who, to make a long story short, reverses the spell, and all those golden objects are returned to their natural state. Midas went on to share his wealth with all and become a beloved king for the ages. Unfortunately for this Liberal government, the Green Slush Fund is not a myth, and it's not so easily reversed. Greed, Mr. Speaker, and its dangers was the moral of the Midas story, and what happens when we become beholden to our own selfish interests. As we have here, Liberal insiders turn dubious projects into gold for other Liberal insiders. And now, as with Midas, the Liberals in charge of the gold are finding out that it was not, after all, free. The chickens are coming home to roost. Incidentally, Mr. Speaker, there's another version of the Midas story where he must judge a musical contest, and when the gods aren't that happy with his choice of winner, his ears are turned into donkey ears, and he must run around with these donkey ears tucked up under his hat, hoping no one will notice. But never mind. I digress. The Liberal government's financial incompetence and corruption is causing a weak investment environment. People told me that this weekend. They're not investing here because of the brutal tax regime. I'm not making this up. Canadians are the ones that are suffering because of it. We on this side of the House believe in fiscal responsibility and that hardworking Canadians deserve to bring home powerful paychecks. We're not here to play games with tax dollars, Mr. Speaker. We believe that if we are going to put our taxpayers' money towards green initiatives, they should be green with measurable outcomes. At the heart of the issue of the Green Slush Fund, Mr. Speaker, in my view, is public trust. Canadians trust their governments to act in their best interest, to steward public funds responsibly, and to be forthright about how decisions are made. When this trust is broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. except perhaps by starting fresh with a new government. The refusal to release the Green Slush Fund documents erodes this trust. It sends a message to the public that their government is not interested in being transparent and that accountability is a secondary or tertiary concern. When citizens no longer trust their leaders, it weakens the bonds that hold our country together, and the consequences are severe. We are seeing this on a daily basis in our streets. As the SDTC whistleblowers testified in committee, and I'll quote again, "The true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose direction to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. It should never have taken 2 years for the issues to reach this point, and what should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year." Abusing employees. Mr. Speaker, the Green Slush Fund scandal is not just about a specific pool of money or a single government program. It's about the broader principles of transparency, accountability, and trust that are essential to a functioning democracy. When governments refuse to be transparent, they open the door to a corruption and abuse of power. And when governments refuse to release documents that Parliament has requested, they betray the trust that underpins our system. This is not the Liberals' Parliament. This is Canada's Parliament, the House of Commons. We must not allow this to happen in Canada. As parliamentarians, we all have a responsibility to demand better. We must hold our government accountable for its actions and ensure that transparency remains a central tenet of our democracy. In closing, Mr. Speaker, the controversy surrounding the Green Slush Fund and the government's refusal to release key documents is a serious issue that deserves our full attention. It's not just about the management of public funds, it's about the mismanagement of the entire government. It's about the very nature of democracy itself. As Canadians, we must stand firm in our commitment to transparency and accountability. We must demand answers from our government, and we must not accept anything less than full disclosure. The future of our democracy and our trust in public institutions depends on it. Earlier, Mr. Speaker, I was asked not to call the government the NDP-Liberal government, but Mr. Speaker, to me and to my constituents, that's the way they see this government has been directed, with the NDP support and the Liberal Prime Minister. We've called this the NDP-Liberal government in this House for many weeks, and it hasn't been challenged to any success. And I would argue that we should continue to be using that recognition. And Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to finish by by standing up here for the people of Toronto St. Paul's and letting them know that aside from the biggest issues that we see in Toronto St. Paul's at the time right now, which are crime, a cost of living crisis, these are all boiling down to what's happening with the mismanagement of this government. We've seen the umpteen scandals of the government, which comes down to mismanagement. It's the WE scandal, it's the ArriveCan scandal, it's the Aga Khan scandal, and others. And we haven't seen a proper management come forward. With the SDTC, we saw the Liberals hand money out to their friends and insiders when they appointed a hand-picked chair who had connections to several of the companies inside that book of business, Mr. Speaker. So I want to finish by saying that we must demand the answers from our government. We must not accept anything less than full disclosure. The will of Parliament must be respected, Mr. Speaker, and the future of our democracy depends on it. Thank you.